On a freezing winter night, the loud voice of a police officer echoed through the neighborhood. I said, "Step out of the car immediately." A man in a sharp-tailored suit stepped out of his expensive vehicle. Snowflakes were falling, ruining his custom-made suit. Before he could protest, he placed his bare hands on the icy road and began doing push-ups. 1, 2, 3. The officer stood nearby, laughing and recording the scene with a satisfied and smug expression. Suddenly, as the man continued his push-ups, a wallet fell from his chest pocket. Curious, the officer shone his flashlight on it, and his face immediately changed. Anxiety replaced the smirk as he realized he had made a grave mistake. Let us reflect on this true story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more daily stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Darnell Hayes, a black man in his early 40s and a prominent city council member, gripped the steering wheel of his silver Mercedes C300 as he drove through the quiet streets of Pinecrest, a mid-sized city in the Northeast. Darnell had just wrapped up a grueling 6-hour city council meeting. As chair of the Police Oversight Committee, his evening had been consumed by intense debates over budget allocations, particularly a controversial proposal to increase funding for militarized police equipment. He had argued passionately to redirect those funds toward community outreach programs and officer training. The effort had left him mentally and emotionally drained. The digital clock on Darnell's dashboard read 11:30 p.m., and the thermometer blinked at a frigid 15 Fahrenheit on 9 degrees Celsius. Snow swirled lazily through the air, blanketing the roads in a thin white sheet. He silently thanked his car for shielding him from the biting cold outside. The nighttime streets were eerily quiet, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers cutting through the falling snow, providing an odd comfort. Darnell's thoughts drifted to Angela, his wife, who was surely waiting at home with a warm meal and words of encouragement. Their modest yet cozy home was just 20 minutes away, and he could almost feel the relief of stepping inside. As he approached a stretch of road lined with darkened storefronts, Darnell glanced in his rearview mirror. Flashing red and blue lights pierced the peaceful darkness. His expression fell as a patrol car appeared behind him, sirens blaring. Darnell's intuition told him trouble was ahead, but he forced himself to stay calm. Obeying the signal to pull over, he stopped under a yellow street lamp. The freezing air outside seemed to seep into his thoughts, clouding them. Taking a slow breath, he glanced at the dashboard, confirming his speedometer wasn't over the limit. His car was in pristine condition, freshly serviced just last week. There was no reason for him to be stopped, or at least none that he could think of. Adjusting his rearview mirror, Darnell watched the officer approaching. Their flashlight cut through the falling snow, the beam reflecting off the mirror and into his eyes. Sitting upright in his seat, his heart beat steadily, his senses on high alert. As a black man, he was all too familiar with how these situations could escalate, even when he did everything by the book. The first officer arrived, his stocky frame illuminated by the street lamp. He knocked on the driver's side window with his knuckles, his name tag reading Officer Bradley. His tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "License and registration," Bradley demanded, skipping any formal greeting. "Good evening, officer," Darnell replied calmly, his hands busy retrieving his wallet. His father, a retired police officer, had taught him how to handle encounters like this, comply and avoid confrontation, as resistance could escalate things dangerously. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Darnell added as he handed over his documents. Bradley didn't respond immediately, scrutinizing Darnell's license with a hawk's eye. The second officer, Reynolds, stood near the passenger side, his expression severe as his flashlight scanned the interior. "Your taillight's out," Bradley finally said, his tone confident. Darnell frowned. "I'm sorry, officer, but that's not correct. I just had my car serviced last week and—" "Are you calling me a liar?" Bradley interrupted, his voice suddenly louder. He stepped back, adjusting his belt in a way that made the holstered gun at his hip more visible, a deliberate, intimidating gesture. "Not at all, sir," Darnell replied carefully. "I'm simply suggesting there might be a misunderstanding." Reynolds, still peering into the car, chimed in. "This is a nice car for this area. What are you doing out here so late?" Darnell turned slightly to meet the officer's gaze, his brow furrowing. "I'm heading home after work. Is that a problem?" Reynolds chuckled, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Working this late, huh? Must be busy." Darnell hesitated, feeling the tension rise. Bradley leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. "Step out of the car." Darnell blinked, his stomach tightening. "Is that necessary, officer? It's freezing outside and I haven't done anything wrong." "I said, step out of the car immediately," Bradley repeated, his voice louder and more commanding. Darnell took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had the right to refuse, but refusing could make things worse. After a moment of frustrated pause, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The icy wind hit him instantly, snowflakes clinging to his tailored suit as he stepped onto the slippery sidewalk. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Reynolds ordered, shining his flashlight directly into Darnell's face. Darnell complied, raising his hands slightly. His fingers were already beginning to go numb, the cold biting into his bare skin. Bradley slowly circled around Darnell as if inspecting a criminal, his boots crunching on the snow. After a deliberate pause, Bradley spoke. "Driving with a broken taillight is illegal, my friend." "It's not broken," Darnell said firmly. "Excuse me?" Bradley's tone turned icy. Darnell took a small step forward, meeting the officer's gaze directly. "I said, my taillight isn't broken. If you check it, you'll see it's working perfectly." The street grew even quieter, the snow muffling the distant sounds of traffic. A few windows in nearby buildings glowed faintly. Bradley's lips pressed into a thin line. "All right, you think you're above the law, huh? Drop down and give me 20 push-ups." Darnell froze, the words hanging in the air like the snowflakes falling around him. "With all due respect, officer, did you just say what I think you said?" "You heard me," Bradley replied, his smirk returning. 20 push-ups, right here, right now." Darnell's chest tightened, the cold forgotten in the storm of anger rising within him. "That's not standard procedure for a traffic stop," he said, his voice steady but controlled. Bradley stepped closer, his hand resting on his taser. "Are you refusing a lawful order from an officer of the law?" Reynolds snickered behind him, pulling out his phone. "You better do it. You don't want to make this worse for yourself." Darnell glanced at the ground, the icy pavement glistening under the street lamp. His mind raced as he weighed his options. Around him, more lights turned on in nearby buildings, and shadows shifted as residents looked outside to investigate the commotion. Slowly, Darnell knelt, the cold seeping through his tailored pants. The injustice of the situation burned within him, but he knew resistance would only escalate things further. As he placed his hands on the frozen pavement, his wedding ring scraped lightly against the thin layer of ice. His breath fogged in the air as he began counting aloud. 1, 2, 3. Each push-up felt like a blow to his dignity, but his resolve remained unshaken. Above him, Reynolds laughed, recording the scene and making mocking comments that added to the chill of the winter night. The absurd spectacle of 2 officers and a man doing push-ups in the middle of the night was recorded by more than just Reynolds. Nearby residents, now watching from their windows, had pulled out their phones, capturing every word and every movement. The icy ground soaked through Darnell's pants as he continued the humiliating exercise. His palms, pressed against the freezing surface, began to go numb, the cold cutting into his resolve. 4, 5, 6, he counted, his breath visible in the frigid air, steady but tinged with silent anger. Behind him, Officer Reynolds snickered, his phone camera capturing every humiliating moment. "That's it, Councilman," Reynolds mocked. "Keep those elbows tucked. We wouldn't want any sloppy form now, would we?" 7, 8. Darnell's voice faltered briefly as his arms began to tremble from the cold and exertion. His breathing quickened, but he continued, refusing to give the officers the satisfaction of seeing him quit. Suddenly, his leather wallet, which had been tucked in his chest pocket, slipped out and fell onto the snowy, wet pavement with a soft thud. The wallet opened slightly, revealing part of its contents under the street lamp's glow. Reynolds noticed, and his curiosity piqued, tilted his head and shone his flashlight on the wallet. His smug expression shifted to confusion, then alarm. Bradley," he said, his voice now quieter. "You might want to take a look at this." Bradley stopped in his tracks and crouched beside the wallet, his gloved fingers carefully picking it up. His eyes scanned its contents until they landed on a gleaming badge-like card. It read, Darnell Hayes, City Council Member, Chair of the Police Oversight Committee. Bradley's face paled. His smug grin vanished completely, replaced by a look of panic as realization dawned. He quickly stood, still holding the wallet, and turned to Reynolds. You didn't think to check who this guy was before pulling this stunt? Bradley hissed, his voice laced with fear. Reynolds shrugged, his previous arrogance replaced with visible anxiety. How was I supposed to know? He's just some guy in a fancy car. No, Bradley snapped, his voice shaking slightly. He's not just some guy. Still kneeling on the freezing ground, Darnell slowly stood, brushing the wet snow off his pants and suit with deliberate movements. His shoulders squared, and his expression was calm but resolute. The atmosphere around them seemed to shift as the balance of power tilted. Am I free to leave now, officers? Darnell asked, his voice calm but laced with quiet authority. Mr. Hayes, sir, I didn't mean to. Am I free to leave? Darnell repeated, his dark eyes locking onto Bradley's. Yes, of course, Bradley mumbled, thrusting the wallet toward Darnell. As Darnell slipped his wallet back into his pocket, he glanced at Reynolds, who hurriedly lowered his phone. Don't delete that video, Darnell said, his tone steady but firm. Destroying evidence is a serious offense, Officer Reynolds. Reynolds froze, his hand hovering over his phone screen. I wasn't going to, he stammered. Darnell stepped closer to the two officers, his presence commanding despite his soaked suit. Let me make one thing clear, he said, his voice sharp but composed. I will not tolerate any abuse of power, especially not in this city, and certainly not from officers who have sworn to protect it. Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but Darnell raised a hand, silencing him. By tomorrow morning, Darnell continued, I expect full, detailed reports on this incident. I want an explanation as to why your body cameras were off, why you pulled me over, and why you thought this behavior was acceptable. Those reports will be on my desk by 9 a.m. sharp. Both officers nodded stiffly, their earlier arrogance now replaced by palpable fear of losing their jobs. Good evening, gentlemen, Darnell said, his voice icy. He turned and walked back to his car, his wet shoes crunching against the snow. Darnell returned to the driver's seat of his car. The warmth of the heater barely registered against the flames of anger and determination burning within him. Blowing into his frozen hands to bring back feeling to his numb fingers, he started the car and drove off. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the two officers standing awkwardly in the falling snow, their figures illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp. As Darnell Hayes drove away from the scene, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. His suit was soaked, his hands scraped from the icy pavement, and his dignity bruised, but his resolve had never been stronger. On a dark, frigid night, filled with egregious missteps, the two officers stood under the faint glow of the street lamp, stiff and humiliated in the falling snow. They had been so confident, so brazen, until they realized who they were dealing with. Their shift in demeanor was almost laughable, but Darnell couldn't find humor in it. This wasn't just about him. It was about every citizen in the city who didn't have a city council badge in their wallet, every person who couldn't push back against such blatant abuse of power. As he turned onto his street, Darnell's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was Angela, his wife. He could imagine her worry as he explained what had happened. But not tonight. He needed time to process the events and prepare for what lay ahead. When he pulled into his driveway, Darnell sat in the car for a moment, his breath fogging the windows. The weight of the night's events pressed heavily on him. He had heard stories like this before, hundreds of them during his tenure on the Police Oversight Committee. He had listened as citizens described their fear, frustration, and helplessness, and now he truly understood. He stepped out of the car, the snow crunching beneath his feet as he walked to his front door. Angela greeted him with a concerned look, but before she could ask, he kissed her cheek and quietly said, "We'll talk in the morning, love." He ended the cold, tumultuous night with a hot shower and a late dinner by his wife's side, finding a brief moment of solace in her company. By 7 a.m., Darnell was seated at his desk, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. His assistant had been called in early, and a stack of documents lay neatly arranged before him. Complaints, departmental policies, and body camera usage records, all evidence of a pattern he could no longer ignore. As he typed an email to the police chief requesting an emergency meeting with the Oversight Committee, Darnell's determination crystallized. What had happened the night before was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger problem, one he was now more committed than ever to addressing. "This ends today," he muttered to himself, the words both a promise and a declaration. By the end of the day, the city would know that change was coming. The morning sun rose over Pinecrest, illuminating a city unaware of the storm brewing in its government offices. By 9 a.m., Darnell Hayes sat at the head of the council table, a stack of reports, complaints, and video evidence before him. Around him, fellow council members gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. News of the previous night's incident had begun spreading, thanks to the videos captured by nearby residents. Darnell opened the meeting with a calm but commanding voice. "Last night, I experienced what so many of our citizens endure regularly: intimidation, humiliation, and abuse of power by those sworn to protect us. This isn't just my story, it's our city's story, and today it ends." He pressed a button on his laptop, projecting a video onto the large screen behind him. The footage detailed the officers' actions, from the baseless traffic stop to their taunts and demands. Gasps filled the room as the humiliating scene unfolded, captured from multiple angles. The evidence was irrefutable. Darnell laid out a series of immediate actions: mandatory use of body cameras, with stricter penalties for non-compliance, de-escalation training for all officers, and the establishment of an independent civilian oversight board. The council unanimously supported his proposals, their urgency amplified by the widespread attention the incident had garnered overnight. By afternoon, the resignations of Officers Bradley and Reynolds were announced, followed by a public apology from the police chief. News outlets across the state covered the story, heralding it as a pivotal moment for accountability and reform. As Darnell stepped out of City Hall that evening, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters, citizens who finally felt seen, heard, and represented. Though the scars of the previous night lingered, he knew this was only the beginning. Pinecrest had changed forever, and so had his fight for justice. Join the movement for justice. Subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and make these stories a part of your daily life. Together, we can create real change.